It's all over. We have a national champion in college basketball. The Villanova Wildcats claim the 2018 NCAA tournament championship last night in convincing fashion, 79-62. And that means we have about 210 plus days until college basketball again. But don't worry, Kevin Sweeney and Brad Cavallero will be here every week breaking down college basketball. And Brad, it's always a bittersweet night, championship Monday. What was kind of your thoughts on the game and thoughts on college basketball going away for a little bit?
So I think I've said this a few times before, but I actually enjoy watching when a Villanova like beats up on other teams. So the Kansas game and the Michigan game were pretty appealing to me. Villanova clearly showed their dominance. They showed how deep they were. They only had like 7 rotation guys, which hurt them in terms of injuries, but in terms of like scoring options and like scoring threats, they were incredibly deep, probably the deepest team in the country. Um, and then in terms of the offseason, I'm always excited for offseason. I think I was the first to get the way too early 18-19 out, which I posted late Sunday night. Um, I didn't see anyone's before mine, so I got a little bump of attention. A few fan bases mad at me, a few happy, but that is just what comes with the offseason.
Yeah, I saw your tweet getting a lot of traction, a lot of perhaps some hatred from some certain fan bases, and we'll get into those a little bit later on the show because who doesn't love predicting, college basketball games that won't happen for 200 days? I mean, I'm a big fan of it, even though I know I'll be wrong. As long as you go in with the attitude that you'll be wrong, you'll be all right. But looking at this Final Four, a good weekend in San Antonio. Unfortunately, maybe not the closest games. The Loyola Michigan game, I would say, was certainly a close game, not necessarily indicative of that 12-point scoreline. The Ramblers really in control of that ball game, and then just kind of lost composure. I thought, and Michigan kind of asserted their dominance in that one. But just going to the championship game, I was just so impressed with Villanova because I came out and in the early stages, I thought Michigan had a great chance to win this ball game with how they came out. They seemed to have a great plan defensively. All the open looks that Villanova had against Kansas were not there, and Michigan was executing well on the offensive end as well. And then to see this, Villanova just adjust, and obviously DiVincenzo with the 31-point outburst was certainly a big factor in that. But they can beat you in so many ways, and I think we'll touch on it a little later as well. But Villanova and Jay Wright have really embraced some of these NBA style spacing concepts that pretty much every coach in college basketball needs to do. And Jay Wright's been a little more open to that change and that transition, than other coaches. And we're seeing it reap the benefits. And I think we'll see it reap the benefits, for the coming years. But just they were in control in the second half. You felt like Michigan for most of the first half was in control of the game, and it was demoralizing for them to go down by 9 into the half, and then those first 4 minutes kind of sealed the deal in my eyes.
Yeah, especially like you'll see some plays, like there was one where I forgot who was bringing the ball up the court, but it was they did not have numbers, and they kind of did like a quick dribble pitch, and Bridges fired a contested three like 5 seconds into the shot clock. Things like that. You'll see more in the NBA. It's kind of easier to do when you're Villanova and you have 5 shooters, 5 guys that can spread the floor. But you're exactly right in the sense that every team should be looking for innovative ways to play offense, especially where we see how successful that Villanova has been these past few seasons with I'll say great recruits, but not elite recruits, which kind of gives some hope to some other teams a little further down the pecking order.
Yeah, and I think if I'm Jay Wright, I have a pretty easy product to sell at this point, not just because of the success, and obviously 2 national titles in 3 years will certainly bring you an immense amount of ability to recruit players you may not have been able to before, but who wouldn't want to play in a system where you have 7 guys in the rotation and all seven are capable and will get chances to go for 20 in a game. Phil Booth has had some excellent games this season. Amari Spellman's had an excellent run this tournament. Eric Pascal's a guy who, has really blossomed into an NBA prospect. And we saw DiVincenzo in this ball game. Even Colin Gillespie, who, 2 to 3 years ago, I was reading from Josh Verlin, who does a really good job covering the city of Philadelphia and kind of the preps into college circuit. And he said, Colin Gillespie was a D2 recruit, for much of his high school days, kind of exploded onto the scene late. Villanova snaps him up. He was excellent in this game. And him next to Javon Quinterly next year will be quite a pairing in the backcourt. But, they play such an unselfish brand of basketball. I can't see who wouldn't want to be a part of it. And playing in that offensive system, I think it'll prepare these guys to play professional basketball. I think it will, and skill development as well with guys like Mikal Bridges, guys like Jalen Brunson, who've obviously developed quite a bit, throughout their careers as those two assumably see their careers come to a close in Villanova uniforms. Just, I'd be hard pressed to find a program right now I'd rather be in than this Villanova one.
No, definitely. And I wanted to highlight something that you had mentioned earlier was, Eric Pascal for next season is a legitimate NBA prospect. I mean, he can play three positions, but most importantly, he can play that small ball five, and he's strong and active enough to not give up anything. He could kind of fit that Semi Ojeleye mold that Ojeleye plays in the Celtics, where he plays the four mostly. He's in there to use his strength and his body to kind of wall up on like bigger guys like Giannis and Paul George, players like that. I think that that's a foreseeable role for him. And then DiVincenzo and Spellman, I think next year could both be first round picks. Even if you take out this breakout performance in the championship game by Dante DiVincenzo, he's brought this secondary ball handler, this shot making, this ability to create off the dribble, which is so essential and so valuable for two guards in the NBA.
Yeah, and going back to Pascal, I think he's a bit of a poor man's Draymond Green. I think I see the Ojeleye comp, but I mean, it's obviously a stretch to say that Pascal will have anywhere near the impact of a Draymond Green. But he can switch 1 to 5. He's incredibly athletic. He can shoot the three. Now he was a 36% 3-point shooter this season. Will that stick into the NBA? I don't know, but I'm pretty confident that he's a serviceable NBA shooter. And he's smart with the basketball. He had a positive assist turnover ratio, which you like. He's active. He blocks shots. He gets steals. Obviously, there's a long way to go to Draymond Green from where Eric Pascal is right now. But I think that's within the range of outcomes that he's that type of impact player. And so, coming back next year with that core of Pascal, DiVincenzo, Omari Spellman, and Phil Booth, along with the recruits they come in, and that's as good a returning core as I think there is in college basketball in terms of guys that were playing together this season. So it's gonna be really exciting to watch. As I think we'll touch on later in the show, but I wanted to get to some draft decisions from Villanova while we're still on them. I think it's pretty safe to say Mikal Bridges is gone. I think it's pretty safe to say that Jalen Brunson's gone. Jalen Brunson's accomplished. Obviously, Brunson has a year left and isn't a guaranteed first rounder, but he's he's graduating. He's accomplished everything you could accomplish on the floor. At some point, I think he should just go to the NBA. I think he's a first round pick if I'm drafting a point guard. But I'm not an NBA decision maker, so we'll see where he goes. I think he's gone though, regardless. Brad, do you agree on that?
Yeah, certainly. The people that are where will Villanova be if Brunson's back? I mean, come on, like wake up, he's not coming back. Same. I saw a couple people ask where Alabama would be ranked if Colin Sexton came back, and that's like, stop. please stop.
Yeah, I know that fans love the optimism, and Colin Sexton wasn't committal about his future, but like if you seriously believe that Colin Sexton is returning to Alabama, I have some pretty major questions. I mean, like, unless there's been reports that they're legitimately considering it, like with Kevin Knox, I don't expect him to return, but there have at least been reports connecting him to the possibility of returning. So you can at least play that game. With Sexton, it was just, I'm not committing to anything yet. I can't imagine a situation in which he comes back to school. I can't imagine a situation where Jalen Brunson comes back to school. Like I said, what more can he do? He's already pretty much an NBA, player at this point. He's as accomplished as you can do in the college game, 2 national championships. So we'll certainly see what will happen with Jalen Brunson. I think there's a good chance that Spellman tests the waters. I think there's a pretty good chance that even DiVincenzo sticks his hat in the ring. Do you agree?
Yeah, there's really very little downside to being an early entrant without an agent. The only downside, which isn't really a downside, is that you're less likely to get a draft workout if people don't think that you're serious about declaring. But even if you get 1 or 2 draft workouts, that's more than if you didn't declare and you got 0. So like you're not in any worse position by declaring early. I think DiVincenzo would probably be a 2nd-round pick. Spellman, I think late 1st, but as we saw with Daniel Gafford from Arkansas choosing to return, next year's draft, especially for big men, projects to be really weak. That's the 2019 draft. So I think Spellman has lottery potential with his shooting ability and his length and his activity on both ends of the floor. So Spellman's one of the few guys that his stock is high, but taking that extra year to play the stock market game and maybe see like a huge jump a la like a Victor Oladipo or kind of a different scenario, but like Marcus Smart after his freshman year entering that weak class. He chose not to stay in it, but he would have been like the 2nd pick, whereas he went into a stronger class next year and was the 6th pick.
Right, and I think Spellman, for as good as he has looked this season, is still a pretty limited player as terms of an NBA prospect. I think you're gambling a lot on his defense. He was pretty bad defensively yesterday against Mo Wagner, and Mo Wagner isn't the most athletic big man you'll see in the NBA. He's certainly pretty skilled, but if Omari Spellman's going to guard bigs, he's going to be in trouble. So I think he needs to come back to school. I think he'll wind up in the D League for much of next season if he does. If he does leave, I don't anticipate him leaving. I think the system in place for him is really good. But I would anticipate him returning to Villanova. Let's touch on Michigan real quick. Certainly a tremendous run for this Michigan team. What did you see from them, throughout this run? Obviously, the big win against Loyola. Mo Wagner was awesome in this tournament. What's the future of Michigan basketball? John Beilein, obviously, I think he's asserted himself as one of the elite coaches in the country. What's the future of Michigan basketball, Brad?
I mean, they're in a pretty good place. I know that we're going to talk about some early rankings in a little bit. I took a composite ranking actually of the 14 too early top 25s that I've found, and I think Michigan is being rated a little too high on average, which suggests that they've built up like this brand equity based on this run. I know when I looked at the roster for next year, I was like, I don't really like it too much, but then I realized it's pretty much just the same roster except no Rockman, no Robinson, and then maybe Wagner, maybe not. I would guess Wagner leaves, but I think that they will be ranked in definitely the top 25, maybe even the top 15 next year, and they can build off that brand equity. They have a very strong recruiting class coming in, and then in terms of their on-court performance, I thought that they did a really good job defensively. They tried to run Villanova off the 3-point line, and it worked for a lot of the first half. You just couldn't really keep them down for too much. They were a little overmatched athletically, but for next season, they're going to have Xavier Simpson coming back as a steady defensive-minded lead guard, and then you have Charles Matthews and Jordan Poole as a breakout candidate. So things are looking up.
Yeah, I completely agree. I thought Luke Yaklich had an awesome plan in this game defensively. The assistant coach who's gotten a lot of headlines, this season. And when I first saw those articles in maybe February, it was about Luke Yaklich. I thought maybe it was a bit overrated. And then I looked back at the Illinois State team last 2 years, and then I looked at this team this year, and the comparison defensively of how bad Illinois State was defensively this year from like how elite they were the last 2 years. And then this year, Michigan takes a huge step, and their game plans throughout this tournament have been terrific. He's a future head coach to me. If I'm a Midwest vacancy, I'm hiring him. I know there's not a ton open right now. Maybe South Dakota is open. Maybe that's a job where he could fit. But, Horizon League job, maybe Detroit Mercy would work. That's another job that's open. So he did a terrific job. I just want to give him a quick shout out. I think the big thing, going forward is the Wagner decision. He was awesome in this tournament, especially at the Final Four. 24-15 against Loyola, 16-7 against Villanova. Once again, a guy, my gut says he leaves just because I don't know how much more he can really prove in college. His stock's pretty high right now. I think someone probably takes a first round gamble on him. So for that reason, I think I'm gonna say he leaves. I wouldn't rule out him staying. But I even like you said, and maybe they are a bit overrated. Preseason, I have them pretty high. I believe I have number 10. We'll get into that a little later. But they're becoming a team where you're going to bet on the coach, and a team where you're going to bet on player development and things kind of coming together. Like I think Isaiah Livers is a talented piece who's going to only improve. Charles Matthews, I think, could have an excellent year next year. Jordan Poole had some really bright moments as a freshman. So I think the future is certainly bright at Michigan, and the job John Beilein's done, it can't be understated. I do think, I will highlight this real quick. The narrative about the NCAA tournament, I think we see it every year, but this year in particular, it really is anyone's game. There's a very, without a crazy buzzer beater by a bench guard, Michigan goes home in the round of 32. And that doesn't change the team Michigan is and was this season. But, they were in this game to win a national title for about 25 minutes. And they could have easily not even made it, out of the first weekend. So just kind of the reminder of just how crazy this tournament is every year, and how much of a bit of a crapshoot it is to get as far as teams go in this tournament.
Yeah, it's even crazier because if you think about it, if Rob Gray doesn't hit the buzzer beater for Houston, maybe they don't beat San Diego State, and then we have the Steve Fisher Bowl between San Diego State and Michigan. And Michigan started slow against Montana. I mean, you can play the what if and the change this, change that game, infinite number of times. And the NCAA tournament itself is such a random if that scenario, which kind of shows why you shouldn't put too much stock into the results in terms of projecting for future seasons, or like a team like Virginia, who was clearly the best team in the regular season, without debate. They were 31-2. They won the ACC regular season by 4 games. They won the ACC tournament, and they lose in the first round. And now it's, everyone knows Villanova was the best team the whole year. It's the revisionist history is bananas.
Yeah, I will say, going back to this point of, this tournament is so crazy and a bit of a crapshoot. It does speak, it more reinforces how impressive Villanova was this tournament. When you look up and down, blew out Radford as expected, then blew out Alabama. We're tight with West Virginia, but we're in control of that game. A 12-point game with Texas Tech. We're in control of that ball game. Dominated Kansas, controlled it from the opening tip. Not from the opening tip, but for most of the ball game against Michigan. So they were in control. They were the best team by the end of the season. And so it's just impressive to see this Villanova team. I think it's, as much as we all love upsets, I felt like this was almost the perfect tournament in that, yes, we had plenty of upsets and the Loyola story, UMBC, but in the end, we had 2 of probably the top 6 teams in college basketball playing for it all. And a Villanova team that I think a lot of people did think was a top 2 team in the country win the national title. So we don't have this question of, was this really the best team in college basketball? Because Villanova, has obviously started itself as the best, as top dog, or at least number 2 with Virginia with what they did in the regular season.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that we should touch on in terms of the championship game itself?
I think we hit it all. Just it was impressive to watch Villanova execute, and obviously they'll have to replace some pieces, but we should see them back. If that was the end for Jalen Brunson and Mikal Bridges in their collegiate careers, certainly shout out to them. Those were 2 awesome players who developed over their careers. Always find that fun to watch, and Brunson, to get to leave with a championship after kind of being a role player in his first one is pretty cool.
Okay, so moving on to the early top 25s. So I don't know how you want to approach this. I know I made mine Sunday night before the Tony Carr decision, but that's the only decision so far that has changed mine. I bumped Penn State from 19 to out, and I moved Wisconsin in after a couple Wisconsin fans asked me my thoughts on them. I reconsidered. I took another look at it, and I think if Ethan Happ comes back, I think that they have a very good case to the top 25. So they slid in. The fan base that is most upset with mine is Texas Tech, which is ironic because out of the 14 too early top 25 that I've taken for the composite, I have Texas Tech the highest. And I'm one of only 3 people of the 14. I think you're one of them too, to have Texas Tech in out of 14. So I don't know what they expect or when they're going to figure out that other people don't even have them in.
Yeah, I have them at 24. I believe you did as well, Brad. I think obviously Jarrett Culver and Zaire Smith's a great place to start, and Kevon Moore's an excellent recruit for them. But, that's a massive gap that Keenan Evans leaves at point guard without really a clear replacement. I know they're looking at grad transfers that could potentially buoy them up a couple of spots, but I think top 25 is pretty much the right spot for this group. Let's just kind of go from the top, though, and break down our picks. Let's kind of just go through I had number 1 is Kansas. Brad, I believe you had Villanova. You want to kind of explain your thinking there, and I'll go into Kansas after you.
Okay, so I'm one of 2 people to have Villanova number 1. The other one is Barstool Reegs. But everyone except for 2 people have them in the top 3. There's a pretty strong consensus top 3 between Kansas, which is the clear number 1 overall, Duke at number 2, and Villanova number 3. For why I have Villanova over those teams, I think so they're losing, obviously, Brunson and Bridges, but everyone else is back. So that is 4 double-figure scorers coming back. Guys seeing bigger roles like DiVincenzo and Spellman and Pascal, who we talked about earlier, are all NBA prospects. And they have Phil Booth, who's a very good college player, averaging double figures. Colin Gillespie made great strides. They have a 5-star point guard coming in Javon Quinterly. And they just have so much depth between guys who didn't see a lot of time this year, like Jermaine Samuels, who's a former top 50 recruit on the wing. They also have a really good recruit from Rhode Island, my home state, Cole Swider, who's a stretch 4, who can really shoot the ball. And they have another super athletic wing in Brandon Slater. So they're just so deep. I think the roster fits together really well. And if the past 4 years have been any indication, is that people are gonna bump Villanova. I know last year most people had them in that 7 to 8 range in the preseason, cited losing Josh Hart and losing Chris Jenkins. I also thought that losing Josh Hart would have a bit bigger impact than it is. But this Villanova team is just it's moving like a Fortune 500 company.
Thanks, John. Well, I had Villanova at number 2. It was pretty close. I did give them a considerable bit of thought. To me, it just came down to point guard. Jalen Brunson, so valuable, so efficient, and to replace him with Quinterly and Connor Gillespie, a good group for sure. And I think Quinterly's got high upside, but I don't think Quinterly can come in and immediately replace Jalen Brunson in terms of just his leadership and his poise. So from that perspective, I held off, had them at number 2. My number 1 team was the Kansas Jayhawks. Losing Graham and Svi Mikhailuk is certainly not easy, but yeah, they had 3 guys. They bring in 6 guys next year as of now. That would be like, if you just took those 6 guys, would be a top, I think, 6 team in college basketball, 6 to 8 team in college basketball. Dedrick Lawson, KJ Lawson, Charlie Moore were 3 like elite players in high major basketball already. And then they added Devon Dotson, who I'm super high on as a high major point guard, coming in as a freshman. Quentin Grimes, who's a extremely well regarded recruit, and David McCormick. I think that's like a top 10 to 12 group in college basketball next year, just alone. And then you add in Azubuike and LeGerald Vick, I think are both pretty safe to return. And then maybe even Malik Newman. I think he might stay. I don't think it's as solid a decision as most people think he's gone. I think it's about 50-50. Even if he doesn't come back, I think I still have Kansas number 1. But this team would be deeper. They're going to be a lot more athletic. I've seen articles that was Dedrick Lawson's the best player on the team. I'm always hesitant on those because they're sitting out transfers, always the best player on the team. If you've ever read a beat writer's September report, the coach always says that the best player on the team is the guy sitting out. So when they don't succeed, it's, well, we're missing our best player. And when it's in the offseason, well, we're going to be much better because our best player was sitting out. So certainly maybe a bit overrated, but Lawson was a 20-10 type player at Memphis. I expect huge production from him. So I have the Jayhawks number 1 in the country, Brad.
So let's say, for example, I think the worst case scenario is they lose Newman, Vick, and Azubuike.
Mm-hmm.
All 3, I think, are more or less 50-50. Where do you think that they would fall if they lose those 3 guys?
I think probably would have them at 8 to 9 range, I would say. Just trying to think here. I mean, like, I could see them being better than Kentucky, but the depth would be a bit of a concern for me. Depends on what they'd add. I think they'd try to go grad transfer if that does happen. Losing Azubuike would be big just because you lose some of that front court, the strength of the team being the front court. All of a sudden, now you don't have that center. I know McCormick's a center coming from Oak Hill, but I don't think he's that big bruising force that Azubuike is, although he is a very big guy in his own right. So if you lost all 3, I think Azubuike is the kind of the big key, because if he comes back, he's kind of an unstoppable force when he's on the floor. His numbers this season are pretty ridiculous when you prorate him over 40 minutes, because this season Udoka Azubuike averaged, pulling it up as we speak, he averaged 13 points and 7 rebounds in 23.6 minutes per game. So if you prorate that over 40, that's approximately 24 points and 12 rebounds. He was just dominant at times. So I think he's the big key. I don't expect him to leave. I don't think LeGerald Vick leaves either, although I could see him leaving just because he doesn't want to see a minutes crunch. So we'll see what happens there. As of now, that they'd be my number 1.
Yeah, I think I agree that 7, 8, 9 range is where they would go if they lost all 3. And I also agree that I think Azubuike to Silvio De Souza is the biggest jump in terms of current to replacement. Like, I think that Quentin Grimes is the eighth best recruit in the country. He could step in, just fine for Malik Newman. And while Marcus Garrett isn't a shooter, I think he is certainly a very high level, like, glue guy and like utility guy who could play at a high level there for Kansas. And then that 3rd team in there is Duke. So did you have any thoughts on Duke? I think you had Duke at number 3 too. Is that right?
I had Duke at number 4, so just a little bit lower. And I'll kind of explain that for 2 reasons. There's one reason that's a very, very much a this is just like a yearly thing, and there's another reason that's like a purely basketball reason. So every year Duke comes in, has all these elite players, is going to be a top 2 team in the country, and then kind of hovers between a 1, 2, and 3 seed all year. Especially when you're a young team, like I just don't think it's reasonable to expect they're going to come in with 99% freshman contributions to win every game you play. And they're going to have bumps in the road. And that's why I don't see them necessarily being that top dog. And then I think there's a very real concern for me about this roster makeup. Now, Trey Jones, Cam Reddish, RJ Barrett, Zion Williamson is quite a quartet. I don't think anyone's denying that. But there's very real questions about whether these guys can shoot the ball. Trey Jones shot 24% from 3 in AAU and 30% from 3 in high school this season. Cam Reddish shot 30% from 3 in AAU. RJ Barrett didn't really play a full AAU session, so I went with his FIBA U19 stats for Canada. He shot 24% from 3 in those ball games. It was a 6 or 7 game trip over to Cairo, playing against some pretty good competition. Zion Williamson is not a shooter by any means. I did not have numbers on him, but he that's the weakness in his game as of now. And I think there's a somewhat strong chance that Coach K starts the season playing those 4 guys 1 through 4, and then the 5 being Marcus Bolden. And if that's the case, I don't see how you create space offensively. There's no floor spacing. Now, obviously, Trey Jones is a great driver. RJ Barrett's an elite driver. Zion Williamson is a beast, and he's going to get to the rim. But when you can pad 3 feet and dare everyone to shoot, it becomes a lot more difficult to get to the rim and score, and they'll be successful. But I think that's a very real hindrance. Gary Trent coming back would be awesome. I just don't see it. I think they're going to have to play Zion Williamson at the 5 if they're going to be successful this season. Well, not successful, but to live up to this preseason number 1 hype, they're going to have to play Zion at the 5, play probably Alex O'Connell at the 4, I would think. Not the 4, excuse me, the 2. Just have him space the floor out and see what happens. They need that glue piece. I don't think they have it right now. So I'm concerned with Duke. I think, honestly, if it wasn't for just like this team is ridiculously talented, I'd go more in like the 7 range for this team. But I'm just so sold that the talent will win them games that I felt like 4 was the lowest I could go.
Yeah, it's tough because with Duke's talent, you can't really rationalize like putting a team or like teams that we'll see in that like 7 to 8 range, like an Auburn or like a Tennessee or like a UNC. You can't really rationalize in like a ranking that's so speculative. Like the too early rankings, there's like no way to put Duke any lower than like 4 or 5 because they're just so much more talented on paper than the other teams that it kind of like it's tough to explain, but like you're just opening yourself up to like a lot of criticism, and the kind of the benefits don't outweigh the risk of looking foolish in 9 months.
Right, exactly. And it's not, if you pick Duke to be number 1 and then they don't live up to it, it'll just be like, oh, Duke was just putting it together. They eventually found it. They're super talented. There was no reason not to. And if you pick Duke, if you go on the limb and say Duke is not going to be that good, and then Duke does, hit all the way to, a number 1 team, a potentially Kentucky undefeated team, then you look like a fool. So I can understand why they're up there. I just have very real reservations about this team going forward. I noticed one team in my elite tier that you had significantly lower, Brad, was Virginia. I had them at number 3. Obviously, I was big on Virginia this year. It paid off. You had them, I believe, down at 13.
By them at 5.
You had them at 5?
I can find you because of my super handy spreadsheet I made, who had Virginia at number 13, and that was Sean Bach.
Oh, yes, Sean was the one who did it at 13. I was reading his over on my site. Sean is contributing for me occasionally now, so that's good to see. But he had him at 13. I couldn't really justify that. I thought that was a bit extreme in terms of how low they'd go. Do you want to give me a quick spread on where everyone else had Virginia, Brad? Just so I know, because I had them at 3. I think that's probably about as high as anyone did.
Okay, yep. So I had them at 5. You had them at 3, and also Brian Roth had them at 3. You guys are the highest, and then Jeff Eisenberg had them at 4. Barstool Reeves had him at 11. He's the second lowest. So their composite score was 6.71 for an average, which put them 6th. So that 13 was a true outlier. People see them more in the middle. I think that 5 to 6 range is appropriate. I know that they're losing Devin Hall and Isaiah Wilkins, who are these big, glue guys. Hall was even more than a glue guy this year, but they were huge defensively. They made plays, and while the starting 5 of Ty Jerome, Kyle Guy, DeAndre Hunter, Giakite, and Salt, that's a strong starting 5, but there's not a whole lot of depth behind it, and it's tough because they were so good, but so unexpectedly good this year that the roster doesn't really compare on paper to these other teams. But you just know with the Tony Bennett coach team that the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, and one of my big kind of justifications preseason when I said Virginia was going to be really good was that I really believed that this Virginia team would be as good offensively as Virginia's ever been. Like, I know Isaiah Wilkins, you lose Isaiah Wilkins. I'm not concerned with their defense taking a big step back because you lose Isaiah Wilkins. Their defense will still be elite. It'll still probably be the best defense in the country, and it might not even be close. But they're still going to be awesome offensively. DeAndre Hunter, I mean, he could have a scary good year. So that's kind of my justification for having him a little higher than the rest. I've been high on them. I could see them going to get a grad transfer. I've seen their name kind of floated as a team that could look at one, although I haven't seen a specific player they would have in mind. Maybe another guard who can score the basketball the way they brought in Nigel Johnson this year. So that'll be something to monitor there. But yeah, Virginia, I think it's definitely still one of the elite teams of the country. People are going to have, anti-Virginia. They were a fluke because they lost to UMBC type of thing, and they can do that. But I'm pretty confident that this is a really good team.
It's a totally speculation here, but a couple guys that could fit. I think that they could really use a 2-3 type of guy. So maybe Joe Cremo from Albany or Ehab Amin from Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Both guys, average 16, 17 points a game in the mid-major ranks. And then maybe a third one. I saw that he's visiting Wake Forest and Xavier, but Nat Dixon from Chattanooga averaged like 13 points and shot 40% from 3. So those are 3 guys right there that could certainly fit in terms of the top wing grad transfers.
Yeah, I like all of those fits. There's a few guys I like. I think Cremo is a tremendous player. I've seen him several times in person, being from that Albany area. I think he'd be an excellent fit. Maybe even a guy like Joe Chartouni, who's more of an on-ball player, but he's a catalyst defensively. He could be a guy, the Fordham transfer who could fit in. They're going to have some flexibility with their roster to go out and maybe take some chances on some kids because the talent's there, and certainly they just need to add a couple of pieces. They're not in a position where they need to go add big scoring or big high upside players. They just need guys who are kind of come in, buy in, and play a role and be stars in their role. So from that perspective, getting one more piece would be great. I don't think they need it though to be a contender.
Absolutely. Another team who is, I think, way too high in the rankings is Louisville. Louisville came in 21st overall in terms of the composite, but some people had them in the single digits. Barstool Reeves had them at number 9, which is completely inexplicable. This is a team that was preseason top 10, top 15 last season, ended up in the NIT. They're losing some of their best players, and now people have them, even higher. I understand that Chris Mack is a good coach, but I think the fact that Louisville's being pushed up so many rankings shows us how phony everyone was when they talked about how great of a coach David Pageant was. Because if the only difference between the teams is the coach, and you're subtracting talent, and you put Louisville, that far up the rankings, you must think that Pageant is up there for one of the worst coaches in the whole country. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn because I think a lot of the, we're going to put Louisville in I didn't have them in my top 25. I considered it, but I didn't. I think a lot of it is obviously Chris Mack, and I think there's also a belief that there will be players brought in. They have 3 spots to fill right now. Actually, they'll have 4 once Ray Spalding gets pushed through in verbal commits as being out. He signed with an agent. They're going to have some spots to fill. If they could grab, Joe Cremo, I know they're involved with him, an excellent transfer from Albany, as we mentioned before. Courtney Ramey, they're involved with him. So if they're to grab pieces like that, all of a sudden you work your way into the mix. But I don't think you should be grading on that right now. I think you should be working on, what you have. I will say this past offseason, one of the things I've learned and I think I'm going to use going forward is I underrated a lot of great coaching hires in terms of, I loved the Baker Dunleavy hire at Quinnipiac, but I didn't think they had talent to be out of the bottom 2. They find their way into the middle tier. Or Grant McCaslin at North Texas. I didn't believe that they could do it talent-wise, even though great coach. They go and win a CBI. Duquesne, a 500 season when I think a lot of people expected worse. Teams like that, I think I'm gonna learn from. And Chris Mack's a coach I want to bet on every day of the week. And I would bet on them being an NCAA tournament team right now, but I wouldn't bet on them as a top 25 team at this juncture. Obviously subject to change as the roster is certainly in flux.
Okay, so did you have any like hot take rankings? A ranking that you kind of went out on the limb of out on the limb for. A team that you're much higher on than most. I know one team that I'm much lower on than most is Oregon, which we can talk about in a little bit. But did you have any teams that you were like much higher on?
It's funny that you mentioned Oregon. I don't know where you have them in the composite that you put together. I have them at number 9. That's pretty high, I think, for what I've seen. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, 1 second. Oregon composite is 15.
Okay.
They had an overall score of 1 second, 15.43. So it's pretty consistent there.
So I have them at 9. So we can kind of touch on them now as a team that I'm a little out there on. I have them at number 9, mostly because when I'm looking at teams that bring in elite recruiting classes, one of the things I'm looking for is the core around them. With this Kentucky. With Kentucky this past year, or Duke coming this year, one of my concerns is, freshmen are freshmen. They're going to have off nights, even the most elite players. How do you get over that? And so to have and how do you solve those chemistry issues, things like that? When you're Oregon, you have a stud point guard in Peyton Pritchard. You have a guy in Kenny Wooten who I think is a breakout candidate. Victor Bailey had an excellent freshman season. You have this nice little core of talent that you can build around with the freshmen. And when you bring in, Bull is going to play the 5. He's kind of a unicorn at 7'1", can shoot the 3, do a little bit of everything. Lewis King is another guy who's very positionally versatile. He can guard multiple positions, can shoot the ball, do a lot of different things. And when Will Richardson, I think, is just like a rotation guard right away out of Oak Hill. So I just think the pieces fit extremely well together, and there's going to be some of those pieces that gel this Oregon team together. That's why I have them number 1 in the Pac-12, number 9 in the overall top 25 as of now. You're lower on them, though. Why is that, Brad?
Okay, so I have them outside my top 25. I'm one of, I think, only 2 people to have that. The highest person had him at 7. That was Ryan Fagan from Sporting News. But in terms of why I'm lower on them, they lose a lot from last year. Troy Brown, Mikhail McIntosh, Eli Brown, were all pretty big pieces and pretty heavily relied upon. And the guys that are coming in, they have these top rated freshmen. But Bol from my understanding, is a guy who has a reputation of not playing very hard and like not really caring. And then Luke King, he's a good scorer, but guys in that range who are one and done, kind of like a Troy Brown before him, they don't usually have as big of a team impact as their numbers would indicate. Kind of like Chris Wilkes last year too. They're more of like if they stay for year two, that's when you'll see like their superstar potential. And then guys like Abu Kijab and Victor Bailey. Bailey was pretty solid last year, but Abu Kijab I thought was a major disappointment. He played really well in the U19s on the team with RJ Barrett. He was kind of a disappointment. And then you have a few solid like top 50 freshmen, but not all top 50 freshmen can be impact players. And then I'm not a huge Paul White guy who slides in at the 4. So I just think that this is a team that's kind of poised to not have their talent live up to their results, because there is a significant amount of roster turnover, and the guys who are coming in are pretty young.
Yeah, I think that's fair on all fronts. I will say with Oregon, I'm kind of a big believer in Kenny Wooten. He was a guy who really impressed me at times this season. Averaged about 6 points, 4.5 rebounds, 2 blocks. He's super athletic. I could see him, especially when your big man and Bol can stretch the floor a little bit. You can play Kenny Wooten at the 4, and then you have this two-headed monster of elite athletes in Kenny Wooten and Bol who can protect the rim. I think they could be pretty, scary defensively if you were to put in then, a Luke King at the 3, maybe either, Kijab if he steps up, Victor Bailey, Will Richardson at the 2, and then Pritchard at the 1. That could be a pretty elite defensive group. Nothing's going to get by those two guys. And Wooten certainly has high upside at 6'9". So we'll kind of see there. But they're definitely a team that deserves a lot of conversation this offseason, and I'm looking forward to talking about them throughout this 200+ day stretch without college basketball.
So now next, the team that the two of us almost pushed into the composite top 25. That's NC State. I had them at 16, which was the highest. You had them at 17. And then Rob Doster was the only other one to rank them at 22 out of the 14 rankings that I saw. But this is a team that I think is being criminally underrated right now. They have a very good point guard in Markel Johnson. They're getting 2 absolutely huge impact transfers with Devin Daniels and CJ Bryce. Devin Daniels has the potential to be their best player. He averaged, I think, double figures as a freshman at Utah. And then Bryce played in Kevin Keats' system at UNC Wilmington and was one of, if not their best player. They returned Torin Dorn. They have a top 5 junior college player in the country coming in Derek Funderburk, who used to play for Ohio State. And then they have a bunch of solid, top 75, top 100 freshmen coming in to play reserve roles. I think that this is such a deep and well-balanced team. So what did you see in NC State that made you champion them as well?
Yeah, a lot of what you said. I think the depth is going to be really fun to watch. A system like Kevin Keats's, you really want depth both in the backcourt and in the front court so that you can gamble on defense and pick up a foul if you have to, and so that you can get those steals and runouts. And I think at times they had to be careful with that just because they didn't have the depth. You look at how deep this backcourt will be by midseason. By midseason, you'll have CJ Bryce, Devon Daniels, Torin Dorn, Braxton Beverly, Markel Johnson, and Blake Harris all in the backcourt. You'll have kind of on the wing / combo forwards. You'll have, as you mentioned, Funderburk. You'll also have Sadiq Bey, who comes from Sidwell Friends in DC. He's their best recruit, although they do have a well balanced recruiting class overall. They add a lot of those combo forward athletes who can protect the rim a little bit, do a lot of different things for your club. I think those are extremely valuable. And then up front, they add two bigs in Emmanuel Bates and Ian Steer, who will just add some front court depth. Obviously, losing Omer Yurtseven is a big blow, but I think it's being a bit overmade. I don't think Yurtseven was ever maybe the best fit for the system. He put up some good numbers, but I don't think that loss will be felt as strongly. I'm a big believer in Kevin Keats as a coach. I thought they were a pretty clear choice for me to be in the top 25.
Okay, so is there any other specific team that you would want to mention? I know I just wanted to mention really quickly. I found it interesting. You know, there were 14 different top 25s that I found, and a total of 46 different teams represented, and that doesn't even include teams like Iowa State or Providence or even VCU, who I think could have reasonably been in a top 25.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I think the team I had out there that's probably the hottest take in terms of a team in the top 25, just because I haven't seen anyone else put them in, is I had Stanford at 23. Mostly just because I kind of believed in them this season, and they were like by the end of the season a top 50 club, and then you bring in, you know, you bring in a good group of recruits. They bring in Bryce Wills and Cormac Ryan from the New York general area, both of whom are good guards, and they'll add into this kind of core that they already have. Dejon Davis and Kezi Okpala had excellent kind of ends to the season. I think De Silva is a guy who has upside and came on as of late. I think last year I was high on Stanford and they burned me early and then kind of validated me late. I'm hoping they kind of stick to the validation side and find a way into the top 25.
One team that I was shocked to see in multiple top 25s, I think they were in two of them, is Cincinnati, who, I mean, they're a team that's just gutted. And the only truly impact guy that they bring back is Jaron Cumberland. I know a lot of people are Kane Broom fans out there. I don't know if they play him and Justin Jennifer together in the backcourt, which would be small, but, you know, they don't have a ton of options there. You know, that was a puzzling move. That was just I think we should have one team from the AAC move. Also interesting that no one voted for Wichita State. You know, they clearly do not have a top 25 roster, but, you know, with that big brand, it would not have been a shock to see them in one or two editions of rankings.
Yeah, it's always funny. It's kind of my final takeaway from these. It's always funny to see people's philosophy come through in how they rank these top 25. Sometimes it's put in the national brands and the coaches that will always win, regardless of whether you love the talent. I know this was kind of a thing last year with Wisconsin, early with Gonzaga, early. One proved them right, one proved them wrong. Then you can kind of see just put in whoever's got the most returning pieces. Then you also see the people who are like, recruits are always amazing and will automatically just be the determining factor. So it's always fun to kind of look at those philosophies in people's top 25s. Usually when I look at one, I can kind of see their philosophy. And then sometimes it's interesting to kind of connect that also back to, you know, where they work, what they cover, and how, you know, maybe a recruiting analyst is going to, you know, have lean towards those teams that bring in those top recruits. Maybe someone like me who's more of an eye test guy who loves watching games, things like that, will prefer a team that just brings back production. I do think it's always something, you know, me and Tony Patelis, a good friend of the program, we'll have him on at some point. I promise you guys. He is, you know, he's always said, you know, older isn't necessarily better. We saw that with Seton Hall this year, a team that people were like, oh, well, maybe they'll make the Final Four this year. And it was kind of not necessarily based in that their team will improve, but, you know, everyone's back. And will this team improve? I think we see that with Tennessee. Where do they improve? That's why I kind of have them still at that 8 range. A lot of people have them, you know, moving up a little bit. I'm just not sure where they improve other than maybe Grant Williams getting better.
Yeah, so I am definitely a ranked teams that bring back a lot of veterans higher. I am the king of Tennessee. I have Tennessee 4th. I have Auburn, I think the second highest at 6th. I have Virginia Tech second highest at 11th. I have Kansas State second highest at 12th. Mississippi State the highest at 13th, and one of the highest for LSU at 15. LSU coincidentally was in all 14 of the rankings. They were the lowest ranked team to be in everyone's rankings. The only teams, yeah. So it was that consensus top 9. Michigan State and LSU were the 11 teams that appeared in every ranking. And then I also have Syracuse in there too, which is another team that brings back a lot of talent.
Yeah, Syracuse is interesting. I think Tyus Battle's gone. Obviously, no Darius Bazley anymore with his D-League decision. I don't see them as a top 25 team yet. I think if they were to add, Joe Cremo, I think be an excellent fit. Cremo is interesting. Like, we're going to mention Cremo with pretty much every opening, just because literally every team in college basketball has the need for 6'4" guy who can put the ball on the floor, shoot the three, and distribute. Like there's no team in college basketball that wouldn't love that as either a starting 2 or their first guard off the bench.
No, he's probably the highest in demand grad transfer. He will be able to pick whatever school he wants for the most part. Just a great situation for him to be in. Did you want me to read off the full composite top 25 before we go, or do you think that people got the picture by now?
I think the people got the picture. I'm sure Brad will continue to update everyone through Twitter about the composite. That's definitely something fun that he's doing. Definitely check that one out. Check out my full top 25. That's on my website. You can see mine and Sean Bach, who is right over at Zag's blog, does a lot of really good work. So glad to have him contributing a little bit on the site. Probably a guy we might have on over the offseason, does a lot of recruiting stuff. So certainly a guy who you guys should give a follow on Twitter too if you haven't. So certainly check him out. Check out my website. Check out Brad's tweeting. Brad's writing over at Busting Brackets. Thanks for listening this season, guys. It's been a whirlwind. And obviously we're done with college basketball. Brad, I know we've kind of discussed our plans in the intro of the podcast in February about the offseason. Do you want to touch on real quick before we let everyone off what our kind of vision is for this podcast in the offseason?
So we have offseason talk going into draft, but kind of in between we had discussed doing like a top 20 most surprising and most disappointing players from this past season, trying to compare lists there, and then draft talk, and then maybe a little summer league. But the offseason, what we were really hoping to do was kind of go more in depth on each team. Takes some of the most relevant teams and maybe do 20-30 minutes on an offseason podcast specifically on that team. Try to hit that kind of niche market that's currently only occupied by a prominent fan site or maybe like a beat writer, but maybe we can give a more national perspective. And I know in the middle of the summer, the diehard fans definitely want to hear people talking about their team.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something Brad kind of brought up in our prep for the podcast before we even really launched it, and something I'm really excited about. So definitely looking forward to that. Looking forward to breaking down coaching changes and transfers and all of that. This, everyone calls this the off season, but it'll still be plenty of work. Maybe I'll take a day off on Twitter or something. I desperately need it. My friends spent the entire month of March yelling at me for ignoring them. So probably have to take a day or two at some point to appease them. But it's been a wild ride, and thanks everybody for following along, and thanks for listening tonight. And I hope you have a great beginning of your off season, and find some way to fill your evenings that were usually spent with college hoops. Bye now.